Over the last 8 years, the Nintendo Switch has become one of the most successful and influential consoles of all time, as well as a staple of my regular gaming rotation both on the couch and while traveling. But over that time, its aging innards have also become steadily more distracting. That's why it's such a relief that the Nintendo Switch 2 has magnetically snapped into our hands at long last, giving struggling games a much needed shot in the arm and opening the door for a whole new generation of third-party support. At the same time, apart from a creative new mouse control option that's more functional than it is comfortable, this sequel system doesn't provide many of its own reasons to upgrade at the moment beyond bringing its out-of-date predecessor into the modern age. And it's charging a substantial premium to do that. From the outside, the Switch 2 basically just looks like a slightly scaled up version of Nintendo's original hybrid system, but a whole lot of smart tweaks make it a much more refined device. For example, the new kickstand similar to that of the OLED Switch is far more robust and versatile, and a second USB port on the top means you can finally charge while playing in tabletop mode. But the biggest change, of course, is the new magnetic attachment system for its Joy-Con controllers. This replacement for the original slide-on rails is genuinely fantastic, letting you satisfyingly snap them on and off with greater ease while feeling entirely sturdy and secure when you want them to be. It's the kind of improvement that makes it hard to ever want to go back. However, we have now covered pretty much all of the major physical differences between the two systems, which I do think is a missed opportunity. Most notably, it's disappointing that the Joy-Con themselves didn't get a more thoughtful redesign. As much as I really love the convenience of being able to use them detached with my arms relaxed at my sides, the button layout has always felt a bit cramped and misaligned, and their size increase here hasn't been taken advantage of to make that any better. After using the substantially more ergonomic Steam Deck for the past 3 years, the reused design of these small, flat controllers now sticks out like a sore thumb, quite literally sometimes. The new Joy-Con do have one exceptionally cool trick up their sleeve. You can pop one off and use it like a computer mouse. While there are a few big caveats I'll get into, the good news is that this tech really works. Well enough, in fact, that it could be every bit the game changer I was hoping for. It's not gonna rival the precision of a high-quality PC gaming setup or anything, but it's more than accurate enough for your average player, and blows the lid off of what kinds of games can be conveniently played at your couch or on the go. The first time I plopped onto my sofa, propped my Switch 2 on my legs, and started casually playing Civilization 7 with all the same precision of sitting at my desk, something clicked. That same feeling came back when I set up on a table at an outdoor coffee shop and played Cyberpunk 2077 with the wide arm of a wooden recliner chair as my mouse pad. Those weren't perfect experiences, but the issues often felt more like software or implementation problems rather than the fault of the tech itself. This is truly the killer feature that sets the Switch 2 apart from any other game system available today. Okay, so what's the catch? Well, much like using a single sideways Joy-Con on its own, it feels as though Nintendo designed the shape of this controller with the assumption that nobody would ever actually use it this way, and in doing so, ensured few would ever want to. Mice are shaped the way they are for a good reason, supporting your hand in specific spots and reducing strain wherever they can. And the ergonomics of how your arm is positioned while sitting are important for that as well. In contrast, the Joy-Con 2 is a candy bar with triggers, used in whatever position provides a flat enough surface. And there isn't really a comfortable way to hold it that stays comfortable over long sessions. The first time I played Cyberpunk with mouse controls for more than 2 hours in a row, I was still feeling the strain in my hand the next day. Playing Civ for just 45 minutes while reclined on the couch inflamed a tendinitis issue in my forearm that had been gone for 3 years. I even 3D printed a mouse-shaped Joy-Con shell to ease the hand strain, which did help, but doesn't do anything to solve the ergonomics of how you have to hold your arm, especially if you're playing with the mouse on your thigh as Nintendo over-ambitiously recommends. The end result is an extremely innovative idea that I'm as excited about as I am anxious to use more. Mouse controls work just fine in short bursts or to navigate menus, and I'm very glad Nintendo took this swing. The potential is there, but the ergonomics are so uncomfortable in most practical scenarios that I'm not sure I'll look to play any big games this way for prolonged sessions in the future, which is a real bummer. Moving from the Joy-Con to the screen nestled between them, the LCD touch display of the Switch 2 is a pretty big upgrade over the base Switch, and sort of a side grade compared to its OLED version. The jump from 720p to 1080p, with the potential for up to 120 FPS, is a big one. That shouldn't be understated. But the move back to LCD does mean the screen doesn't perform quite as well outdoors and on the go compared to an OLED Switch. It's still a decent screen with pretty solid speakers to accompany it, and I was able to play Mario Kart on a sunny day in the park with no visibility problems. But a darker game like Cyberpunk was basically impossible to make out at times. All in all, it feels like a bit of a wash depending on your play habits and priorities. Thankfully, that upped frame rate and resolution aren't isolated to handheld mode. The redesigned dock allows the Switch 2 to output in beautiful 4K with HDR and higher frame rates. The ability to run games like Tears of the Kingdom with improved resolution and zero lag is probably the biggest selling point for anybody who'd been feeling the Switch 1's age more and more each day, as we all cried out for the Switch Pro that never came. If you've only ever gamed on the original Switch in the last 8 years, the upgrade being offered here is substantial. The free updates and paid Switch 2 editions that have been released for many existing games make them look better, load a whole lot faster, and run the way it feels like they were always meant to. That backwards compatibility support is really great. It's also easy to see just how much of a jump has been made here when you compare the games of one developer, CD Projekt Red. The version of The Witcher 3 that came to Switch 1 was almost a novelty, with muddy graphics and a passable frame rate that made it seem like a marvel it was able to run at all. Cyberpunk 2077, on the other hand, runs more than respectably on Switch 2. It's not on par with other modern platforms or anything, but it's far more than a consolation prize, and a totally fine way to play an excellent RPG if you haven't otherwise had the opportunity. It's a whole new world as far as third-party support is concerned. That all said, if you have gamed on devices besides the Switch 1 since 2017, the technical upgrade here is not exactly what I would call exciting in the larger scheme of things. The Switch 2 is Nintendo playing catch-up, and things like HDR and 4K haven't been thrilling new features for over half a decade. They are great to finally have, don't get me wrong, and plenty of awesome games no longer feel stranded on old tech, but part of me worries we'll be right back to begging for a Switch 2 Pro when the PlayStation 6 inevitably arrives in a few years' time, because this one still hasn't really fully closed the gap with the consoles that launched back in 2020. I mean, Microsoft literally announced it is working on the next Xbox console generation as I was making this video. Of course, Nintendo has always been more focused on doing a lot with a little in that regard, and that has largely worked to its benefit. The newest Pokemon games were certainly struggling on the 2017 hardware and have gotten a big boost here, but it's hard to argue Breath of the Wild and plenty of other Nintendo games don't still look fantastic today thanks to their outstanding art direction. So even just playing catch-up is a big deal, and I don't mean to undersell how great it is to feel like the training wheels have finally come off. But that's part of my point. This does not feel like a whole new bike. Functionally speaking, the Switch 2 feels closer to that Switch Pro we never got than a brand new console. And yes, that was similarly true of the PlayStation 5 and Series X when they launched. But for those systems, their top-of-the-line graphics power was at least somewhat novel on its own, which is not the case here unless the Switch 1 is all you know. Not even just in the context of handheld gaming, given the rise of portable PC options like the Steam Deck in recent years. Instead, the big additions are stuff like Game Chat, which is basically Nintendo's own version of Discord integration with a dedicated button on the right Joy-Con to open it. And while it's certainly a neat inclusion, it's also so hilariously overdue that IGN literally named a podcast Nintendo Voice Chat 17 years ago as a goof because it's, to quote the 2008 announcement article, the only place you'll find reliable voice support and Nintendo in the same area. That joke could almost vote before it stopped being true. Meanwhile, we still can't customize the home screen. We still don't have any media apps beyond YouTube, and some Switch 1 options like Hulu no longer work at all on Switch 2 as of launch. There's at least a welcome and much needed redesign of the eShop, but the system menus and interfaces are otherwise close to identical. This kind of incremental system upgrade isn't necessarily a bad thing in a vacuum, but it stands out to me when this console is also a whopping $450 compared to the original Switch's $300, despite having slightly worse battery life in handheld mode. When playing big games, I would generally have to plug in by the 2.5 hour mark. Pair that with only a single launch exclusive worth playing, and apart from revisiting games I've already beaten at a resolution and frame rate I've been used to seeing elsewhere for half a decade, there's just not that much that's got me actively excited to actually play my Switch 2 at the moment. I'm sure that will change when we get Donkey Kong Bonanza next month and a few other new games down the line, but for now, this launch feels a little subdued. The Switch 2 is a Switch, but bigger and better in nearly every way, with all of its successes and most of its faults accounted for. Its hybrid nature is still just as good of an idea as it was 8 years ago, and a lot of its best games benefit massively from the beefier tech inside it that allows for 4K, higher frame rates, and faster load times. But all of that feels more like Nintendo getting back to treading water as the Switch started to fall a little too far behind what people expected from their games, rather than providing a compelling reason of its own for you to pay 50% more for this upgrade. The new Joy-Con take an impressively creative swing at giving you that reason, but while its innovative mouse controls are a game changer on paper, they're so ergonomically uncomfortable to use in practice that I can still feel the strain in my arm as I record this. The end result is a console I really like for all the same reasons I loved the original Switch, but one that's also left me strangely underwhelmed. It's a step up that's vital if the Switch 1 is the only way to play games you have access to, but currently feels about as exciting as a long overdue phone upgrade for anyone with other options.
Tech Reviews editor Michael Heim here, and oh, how the tables have turned because now I am talking to Tom Marks, executive reviews editor, and you just watched his Switch 2 review. But here we're going to give a little behind the scenes of the review process and, Tom's kind of thoughts as he was reviewing the console. And he's no stranger to this process, though. He re-reviewed the Switch in 2018, I believe, and reviewed the Switch Lite and did high-profile releases like Tears of the Kingdom. But we have a unique situation here because no one really got a Switch 2 in advance, and so the review process does change, and it's kind of a unique situation we had here. So can you give a little context on how you handled that situation?
It's a bit terrifying and a bit freeing at the same time, right? Everyone sort of knows what this thing is, and you also get the benefit of, like, if issues are cropping up right away, I'm not going to be able to find that in a week with pre-launch access, but the world will find it very quickly. So we get that side of things is very good. But the flip of it is, we are rushing a little bit to try to tell you guys what we think about it and, tell you what the good and the bad and my experience with it. And I think that's what it really boils down to is we have to just sort of take it a day at a time and figure out what this thing is like to live with, right? And what is it like to spend time with? And we're all figuring that out sort of at the same time, but I can only speak from my experience. And it becomes this balance of not wanting to rush, not wanting to just get the review out because we wanted to get the review out. Like, my target, to be fully transparent, was to actually get a review last Friday up. And I, on Thursday, I think it was, said, you know what? I have not spent the time I really need to just taking this Switch out and going to a park and sitting down until it dies and seeing what that what happens there. And so I spent another weekend with it, and I came back, and I think I am pretty comfortable now with where I am through all of that and where I landed with the review.
Reviewing a game and reviewing a piece of tech are very different things. So, you know, having to review so many games and edit those reviews that you get in, I kind of want to pick your brain about how you approach reviewing a piece of tech.
Yeah, it is a different process, right? Because even, you know, all reviews are subjective. They're all the opinion, the experience of whoever the reviewer is. That is what a review is, kind of sort of fundamentally. But tech also adds this element of, you know, $450 might be an astronomical amount to some people and nothing to others. And how much does that sort of factor into things? How much are you commuting so that, you know, are you putting more weight on the portability, the handheld, the quality of the handheld screen than somebody else who's just using their Switch 2 for 4K on their TV nonstop? All those things are going to vary a lot person to person. So the tactic I take generally, and I took very specifically for this review, is, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a vibes review, right? It is my experience with this thing in a very down to earth, just sort of, here's what I thought of it, here's how I felt about these things and that things. There are reviews out there that measure lumens on a screen and are really going into tech depth. And if you want that stuff, that's absolutely great. Digital Foundry obviously is a wonderful resource for stuff like that that exists and can exist alongside something like this review, which is really just more meant to be, hey, you know, I really went hard spending time with this thing, and here is what I found out, and here's how I feel about it at the end of that 2 weeks. So that's very different from a game, especially because there's not a finish line. You know, this is also why for most of our major console reviews, we will do re-reviews in a year or two down the line. We did this with the PS5, we did this with the Series X, I did it in 2018 with the base Switch, and I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, in 2026, 2027, we come back and we look at the Switch 2 and we say, okay, how did some of the problems that I had at this point in 2025 hold up? How did they get fixed? Did patches come through? Were some of those ungrounded ultimately? You know, you're going to be spending a lot of time with this piece of hardware across a lot of different experiences. And there are just some things that you're not going to be able to pin down in a way that is very different from games where, you know, there's going to be things that pop up here and there, but ultimately you beat the game and you know how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm. What do you want to see in the Switch 2's future now that you've kind of wrapped your head around your experience on the launch window?
You know, it's hard because a lot of the things that I wish it did differently are hardware related. I wish, you know, I talked about this in the review, that I wish they updated the Joy-Con to be more ergonomic, have a slightly different layout. And that's not something, you know, they could make a new Joy-Con that straps on, but if the Switch 1 is any indication, they're not really interested in doing that. And so I guess my hope going forward is mostly built around mouse controls, and mostly, you know, I made the joke in my written review of if they made a mouse con, if they made a, you know, in the same way that there's a Pro controller, a specific sort of thing that acts like a Joy-Con, but really looks like a mouse and functions like a mouse and has buttons on your thumb that are comfortable to use like a gaming mouse, I would buy that in a heartbeat. And I think that's where a lot of my hopes for this system lie, is the most potential for what is here is in that mouse support. And I would love to see them do whatever they can to help it flourish beyond gimmicky little mini games. I think if mouse controls ends up just being gimmicky mini games for the foreseeable future and for the life of the Switch 2, that is a huge missed opportunity for what this tech is offering. And I think probably what we'll end up seeing is the next generation of Steam Deck and handheld gaming PCs will go, oh, that's a really good idea, and run with it in the way that handheld gaming PCs were inspired by the original Switch. So I just hope that Nintendo doesn't fumble that ball. And, you know, the software stuff is sort of secondary to that, and we'll see. Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
You know, I just want to express I love this device. It's weird to review a device that you really, really love using, but then are also disappointed by, right? It's a nuanced
Sure.
thing.
Yeah,
and I think that goes forward to what you were saying about we're not going to know fully what lies ahead for this thing. And, you know, nobody saw Joy-Con drift in the original reviews of the Switch. That was a thing that developed over months and, you know, sometimes not very many months, but we don't know if that problem is solved, and we will never know if that problem is solved within this short review window. But in a year or two, when we have an update to this review, maybe we'll take another look and go, hey, you know what? There have been no reports of Joy-Con drift. That's kind of great. Or it's terrible and it's worse than the original. We don't know yet. So there's a lot to still see coming.
So those are all of Tom's thoughts on the Switch 2 and the review process. We appreciate you watching, and you should also check out our reviews of Mario Kart World and my review of the Switch 2 Pro Controller. And for everything else in the Switch 2's future, stick with IGN.